This is the DOLBY CP500 processor, and it's a wonderful piece of kit. But my word, this has given me some trouble trying to get this going 100%. But if it hadn't have been for people like Ben Wales in particular, I don't think I would ever have got this working properly at all. This is my Kinoton FP20 35mm projector, and this is what the DOLBY CP500 hooks up to, and this is what has caused all the problems. I've been communicating with many other film collectors about this, Mark Stuckey, Andy Summers, Rob Tucker, quite a few others, but also Steve Rowley, and also getting a load of freebies from Steve Rowley, which is very kind of him, and also Ben Wales, who I mentioned. I've known Ben for quite a number of years through our involvement with the British Film Collectors Conventions under Keith Wilton, and here are some of Keith's shots of Ben preparing a 70mm screening of Lawrence of Arabia at the 50th BFCC in October 2005, taken from Keith's DVD, The Men Behind the Movies, Part 3. Ben learned of the problems I've been having with my FP20, which Noel Pratt had prepared for me, and this is Noel demonstrating this machine when we went to pick it up. But the CP500 was an unknown quantity. Noel is a big 35mm collector, but he only ever, like me previously, has screened his 35mm one spool at a time at around 20 minutes per reel. So the CP500, which he was gracious enough to give me, and said try that out, but didn't have all the leads to hand. He would have to find the leads, and that was going to take some time in his place. And I could understand why, having looked around at all his equipment and his amazing film collection. And this is where Ben comes in, because once Noel had sent me all the leads, I was able to hook up the digital sound into the CP500 and then get adapters from the Phoenix connector from the cables coming out of that, which is this green connector block here with all the wires coming out of it. And if I can get this close enough, you can see that each one is labelled up for each channel. Took me a while to spot that, and that caused some confusion, I can tell you. But into the amplifier, and it was obvious immediately that something was wrong. I was only getting 2 channels that you could really make any sound out of. The front 3 channels, as it turned out, were all muffled, but I had them all hooked up in the wrong place. I couldn't tell which was which, and it turned out that the subwoofer was good and the rear left and rear right were good. But it took Ben coming over between Christmas and New Year 2023, so last year, in order to work this out. And once we'd established which channel was which ones were putting out muffled sound, we stood here, we listened to the digital sound running off of here through the CP500 into the amp, and then this rubbish coming out of the front. I said to Ben, it sounds to me as though it's somehow being converted to low frequency effects. And Ben's wheels started turning, they probably already were turning, and he said, we'll have to come back to this. The following day, he sent me a message and he had the answer. And what he sent me was, well, digital file of this, which I've printed out. And this is the 683 optional card in the CP500. And the instructions here said, pull this card, and then on the next card, the neighbouring card, the 682, there are 3 jumpers. Now, I'm not going to pull this card out again just in case, but I'll try and get shots of these jumpers. They're the little black pins you can just see sticking out here alongside the green blocks, and you can see them on here, these 3 jumpers here. They're not quite in these positions when you pull the card out, but you have to pull each of these off, and initially they were set to the yes position for low frequency. You have to put them onto no. So you lift them off the top 4 pins and you put them back down on the bottom 4 pins, but there are only 6 pins to each of these jumpers, so that's how it's done. Then I played a digital sound film. It was a eureka moment, wonderful. And at that point I quickly saw that the sound was failing over from digital sound to analogue sound, and sadly the analog sound was not coming through, so I was just getting nothing once the digital sound failed. That's why I had to set up a second sound system in here just to overcome that, until hopefully we could overcome the problem with the analog stereo sound. So Ben then said I will have to come over once more, and it's taken him a while to book us in. I think he's a busy man. I don't think it's entirely 35mm problems he's sorting out, but he's just visited over the last couple of weekends, and he'd established over our internet discussions over the web that it was actually the analog sound connection that was causing the problem, and he's had this all in pieces, and you can see Ben here working his magic. He's in here. The biggest problem he had was actually enlarging the hole here to take a 5-pin XLR, but he's done a shielded cable which is properly grounded, and that seemed to be the problem we were having, that the cables that I had up to this point were not properly grounded, and therefore the level of the sound was not loud enough for the CP500 to be able to play it. I put a preamp on it, the sound was too loud and thoroughly distorted, so that told Ben what the problem was and what the solution was, and it took a couple of visits to get that straightened out. But he put this cable together, made all the modifications necessary, the connections, soldered everything in, hooked it up to the CP500, and there was a genuine eureka moment. And I then put a digital sound film on, real one actually, of Alien Resurrection, because I'd already run that, and I knew that it failed over several times in that real one, and it didn't let us down this time. It failed over, and the failover was seamless. I could not tell the difference between the Dolby Digital and the Dolby SR sound. In fact, I've since run the 5 remaining reels of that film, and I didn't tell one failover all the way through. However, I will also say, but this time upon watching Alien Resurrection, I kept an eye on the CP500, and I must be doing something slightly different, because I didn't even see any failovers to Dolby SR. And having learned from Svein at the Prince Charles Cinema with the bottom loop, he says it's a 4-finger width, and he showed me how he did that. Just measured the bottom loop with his forefinger, and I've put that into practice. And since I've been making sure that when this fires up it hasn't jumped a single cog on the sprocket or anything, and having a 4-finger sort of gap on the bottom loop, I seem to be getting more reliable Dolby Digital sound. So I think most of these features I've got are sort of on the limit of the error count, and where I get the thread up absolutely right, the lace up absolutely right, then I think it's just enough to stop that error rate going over into the 8 and the F reading. Now, Ben has had a long career in the cinema industry as a projectionist, a bit more of an engineer than a projectionist, I think. So while he was here, I thought I've got to do a full interview with him sometime, because this man, he has worked in some places. And for those of you that remember when the Millennium Dome opened in 1999, it had a couple of cinemas in there. Well, Ben was a man, and I think that's quite historic, because I think those auditoriums there were fairly enormous, so not something we see today. So while he was here, I got him to talk about the problems we had here, and also couldn't resist briefly asking him to talk about some of his time in cinemas. Where have you worked in cinemas?
Oh.
You've been all over, haven't you?
I have worked literally on every film system I can think of, from Super 8 to IMAX 1570 over the years. I worked in Odeon, ABC. I worked for Picture House Cinemas. I sort of did a lot of freelance work, so it was all sorts of projectors, machinery, screening rooms, outdoor cinemas. You name it, I've been there. I think one of the highlights was actually working at the Millennium Dome. It was 2 cinemas, each 2,500 seat capacity, running a 70mm film all year with a 60-foot widescreen.
And that was specifically for the year of the millennium, wasn't it?
It was indeed, yeah.
So that's quite historic, really, isn't it?
It is, 25 years almost.
An awful long time. And you've sort of come to my rescue, because I've been having terrible trouble getting the sound right off my Kinoton FP20 to the CP500 Dolby processor. So you had an idea when I spoke to you on the phone what might be the problem. So talk us through what you established that problem was, and how you just sort of, on the second visit, rectified it.
Well, what you have a basement reader head, which is LED light. So one side is digital, the other side is analog. So it's like one above each other. With the analog PC board, there's like 5 cables, which run off that board. So there's like left and right channels, and there's a plus side and a common wire. So there's like 2 pairs of wires plus a common wire for grounding. Because with LED, they are prone for earthing problems, so they have to be really well grounded and shielded. Unfortunately, the cabling to the projector from the CP500 wasn't properly grounded, and there wasn't enough cores in the cable to make a proper connection, so I'm afraid it wasn't going to work. So we literally had to go back to basics, go back to the actual PCB board, look at drawings, trying to trace it back, work out a system, because obviously the projector has to be removable. So what I've done in my machines at home, I've done a sort of XLR plug with a sort of 4-pin, 5-pin connector. And the idea is that you can just literally plug and play. So the leads are already made up. Because in a cinema, everything's hardwired in, so there isn't a need for connectors. And also the less connectors you have, the less problems can go wrong. So the idea is that you just literally wire up hard wires to the projector inside, and that's it, one connector. But in our case, we got about 2 or 3 connectors. So in this case, the lead was coming out of the PCB board, the basement reader head, to a connector inside the machine, where the main leads hardwired to the processor was joined to a 1/4-inch jack plug. And again, there wasn't enough connectors on that to actually make it work. So that had to be disposed of.
So a really low level coming out, didn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And then I put a preamp on, it was all distorted.
Well, that'd make it worse, because you've got the impedance levels would be wrong, and it wouldn't just not work. So, because obviously you've got a preamp in the processor already, which is calibrated as a balanced line going in. So we had to put a different way of system of a XOR plug, which seems to be the best I've discovered. So we went for a 5-pin one, so it's like 5 pins. So it's a physical contact in the machine. So once it's there, it's there.
Yeah, can't go wrong. And the point of having the Dolby analog sound when you've got Dolby digital is that digital doesn't seem to be ultra reliable, does it? So what is supposed to happen if that goes wrong?
How the system works, with the basement reader head, they're a bit different to the old Dolby penthouse heads, which was the Cat 699, the Cat 700, which was like literally like a mag head penthouse reader head. In the later machines, they produced what called basement reader head, which is what we've got here, is a system below the optical pickup on a LED head. So it was built what they call basement reader head, so obviously a lot cheaper. But the downside of that, the error rate is where it doesn't actually pick up the actual Dolby tracks, can be known to be higher. So if you get like a worn trailer, scratched, they do tend to fall over and fail. And the higher number you get on the reader, the error blocks the missing data, so it can't compensate that missing data. So then it just resorts back to analog sound, which would be Dolby SR.
Yes, well, if it's got a digital track and it's got an analog track, it's going to be SR by the time of digital, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. If it's recording SR, there has been known to just be Dolby A tracks with a digital track I've come across. And I have seen films years ago were actually mono with a digital soundtrack.
And does it fail over to the right one on the Dolby processor, or if it fails on the digital, have you then got to press buttons, or does it all work automatically?
No, it should do automatically. If it doesn't see the data there, it would say, I'm receiving no information, so I'll resort back to analog sound.
And we just had some tests here, and it's seamless. You can, and in actual fact, a lot of the time, the Dolby SR seemed to sound better than the digital.
In some cases, the Dolby SR, which is spectral recording, had a higher headroom for HF. Depends on how it's set up. It can have a better range on audio. It depends on the mix. So sometimes Dolby Digital sounds better than, obviously, in most cases SR, if you get noisy tracks and stuff. But I've been to cinemas where Dolby SR did sound better than Dolby Digital.
So if all has gone to plan,
hopefully this will connect to the CP500 and we should have sound. Fingers crossed.
So it might have been a bit frustrating at times, but it's been wonderful learning all about this equipment, and we're having a great time going through our features. I'm gradually going to get them all onto big reels, and so we'll be able to watch them an hour at a time between reel changes, and that really is something special for 35mm, at least I think it is, having up to now been using sort of around 20 minutes between reel changes. But the CP500 comes with something of a manual, and it's amazing when you first look at this, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But as is usual for those of us that have worked in the IT industry and other sort of problem solving roles, over time things start to make sense. And I wouldn't say they make a lot of sense just yet, but it makes a darn sight more sense than when I first got it, I can tell you that. So a wonderful adventure, another great learning process, and I'm chuffed to bits with how this is working out, even though because of the design of cinema we had to adapt to here in the end, I'm having to project at a bit of an angle, but I'm getting that straightened out as well as possible, and with the motorized masking it can actually all be masked off for the most part, so you don't even notice. So it's all proving to be a lot of fun, and I hope it will be for many years to come. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like and perhaps consider subscribing so I'll be encouraged to carry on creating similar content to this in the future. Until the next video, bye bye for now.